We have to create more of the natural biomes. And the extent of the problem is illustrated by the current carbon balance. As of, I think this is 2011, is the latest figures, fuel burning and cement manufacture were releasing 8.1 gigatons per year. Land use change, forest destruction, 1 gigaton, so about 9 gigatons of release. The sinks in the ocean are estimated to be about 2.5, and on the land, including the wetlands and so forth, about 2.5. That gives a surplus each year of about 4.2 gigatons. And that surplus, or as much of it as possible, we need to rebind into sinks. And the new sinks that we will need, let's assume that we stop burning forests, we would need to rebuild about as much sink on the land surfaces as we have at present. So if we have converted 75% of our land surface to anthromes, we have to take about a third of that and convert it back to fully functioning biomes. Now, we know a lot and do a lot in lake restoration. But when we look at it, it is mostly very local, it is quite often ineffective and short-term, and quite often it is cosmetic. And I think we have to become, with our terrestrial ecologist colleagues, much more ambitious. Instead of doing these tiddly little jobs with a bit of FOSLOC, a bit of effluent diversion, a bit of buffer zone, we have to think about recreating whole functioning biomes. It will look like this. The top there in green, you have the characteristics of pristine systems. They have low available nutrients, they have a high characteristic structure, they have high connectivity with other systems, and they have large size. 3/4 of those we have degraded to anthromes with high available nutrients. They're eutrophicated, land as well as water. They have a much reduced structure, and they have great isolation, low connectivity. At the moment, what we're trying to do by the sort of restoration we do is to move into the orangey area, which is essentially rehabilitation. And that will remain essential, I think, in the urban agricultural areas. But at the best, it is multiple use, and multiple use is multiple mediocrity. What we need to do is take about that area, 25%, 1/3 of that orange area, and really seriously convert it back to biome structures, to fully functioning independent ecosystems that will store carbon. And that means not multiple use, that means zonation. I don't actually see that we can untangle, that we can actually restore to anything like a fully functioning ecological state where we have agriculture, where we have cities. We have to actually isolate, we have to create land to have proper biome restoration. That means ambitious goals for habitat restoration. It means some research questions for us. What's essential to ecosystem functioning? Well, I think we understand that already. But how big and how connected? How much do we need to convert to function independently? How can we maximize carbon storage without compromising function? Does eutrophication increase or decrease storage? That was a question one paper raised in this conference. But we need to get on with the job, or to persuade the politicians that we need to get on with the job long before we can precisely answer those questions. We need a grand strategy. We need to reduce our emissions, we need to rebuild the carbon sinks, we need new sorts of attractive cities so that we can free land, maybe by building them on the sea, for regenerated ecosystems. We need more intensive, high technology, ethical farming on much reduced areas, and we need new arrangements to use less food more efficiently. We waste half the food we produce, so there is a lot of scope for using less land. And then we need population reduction and steady-state economies. So we do need a long-term strategy. And there's no doubt about that, that it will be difficult, but that's what we have to have if we want to solve the climate change problem. Our problem is that these people are rank amateurs. These people cannot do it. They don't have the right background to see what the problem really is. The first 6 of these background educations of our world leaders, 194 world leaders, are in economics, politics and administration, law, business, the military, and engineering. Only one has any sort of background in environment. And so the scope for leadership top-down, I think, is very low. And not only have these people the wrong background, they are using GDP as a measure of progress, and GDP actually increases as you damage the environment more. And there are, it is estimated, about 100,000 lobbyists on the behalf of damaging industries in New York and Washington, in London and in Brussels, whispering into the ears of these people to counteract what the science is actually telling us. So I don't think there is any hope of us being led out of our present situation by our present political systems. I think the solution has to come from the bottom up. And I think we as scientists have a major responsibility to educate the public. Communication, very important. The decisions, when the chaos, when the crises come, I think, later this century, we will have an opportunity maybe to create something new. And it is these people who will need to be educated, need to understand the issues, who will be influential in that. This lady here who digs out the silt from her lounge in the second time in 5 years in a situation where the government tells her it's the 100-year flood. So, in conclusion, what would Gandalf like us to be doing based on the lessons that I've tried to draw from the 5 hypotheses? From 1 and 3, ideas and the new ideas and the approaches, I think he would want us to be looking outwards, thinking independently, and with new ideas and experiments. From item 2, our slavery to the bureaucracy of the Water Framework Directive, I think he would want us not to be doing that, but informing the public, not pandering to the existing power bases and serving the bureaucracies. On hypothesis 4, he would want us to be communicating much, much better, to lose our fear of conforming, and to communicate much better. And on the last hypothesis, I think he would be wanting us to ready the public to promote positive change and to act when the inevitable crises will come, I think, later this century, early next. But above all, I think he would want to say that what we do is of first-rate importance. But we have to raise the stakes, and we have to fight for it. I suspect that if I was saying what I'm saying now, 40 years hence, I would be bundled off to jail. Because that is the way that the authorities will react when things get more and more sticky and they don't want people standing up saying they're doing the wrong thing. But we have to face that. We have to fight. We have to raise the stakes. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Brian Moss, for the nice presentation. We have time for several questions.
Early in your lecture, you made critical remarks about the lack of ideas in our field. But it's the fact that we moved on from throwing in new ideas to testing them and making them operational, a sign that our science is maturing, like that happened in the chemistry in the 19th century and physics in the 20th century.
Yeah, we have certainly moved on to testing, but I think, staying on the plateau of testing what we have is not enough. We need to, for a science to be vigorous, you need really new ideas coming in all the time. And that is, of course, the history of chemistry and physics throughout the 19th and 20th centuries.
But in your second part of your lecture, you made this move to what we should do, and you think we really need new ideas for doing that, or can we just make the ideas that we have now operational and then fight the crisis?
Of course, I don't know. And so one has to have a strategy where you do both. And we have to put over what we already know, and we do that badly. But maybe we're actually wrong about some of the things. And so one does need the infiltration of new things to keep testing what we already have and to see if there is really something new. But of course, I can't answer that question. The future is not, even for Gandalf, the future is not clear. And so you have to have a strategy that will spread out, that will favor everything, that will manage whatever the situation is.
Thank you very much for your most impressive lecture. It's hard to add anything on this. I want to put a little bit the same point. Of course, limnology has made a development since the 1960s, and there's no way back to the single-authored descriptive papers of the 1960s. We have made a long way from those descriptive studies over more qualitative studies to the now quantitative and large-scale studies, which of course need to be multi-authored. And I see also the Water Framework Directive just as a sort of a stone in that way, milestone, because of course this urged the scientific community to produce some quantitative predictive results that even can be applied to a large-scale area as Europe, and this has been, of course, a huge challenge, and maybe we have partially failed. However, I think it's too easy to do this Water Framework bashing. If we bash the Water Framework Directive, we bash our own scientific community because it was us who were not able to do better simulations, better predictions. And I think if we compare the 14 years of the Water Framework Directive with the 14 years before, or if we compare our development in Europe with that in North America, the balance is not so bad. And only this bureaucratic huge effort has now produced those long-term data sets that we maybe now use to assess the year-to-year dynamics of the ecosystems that you highlighted, that of course has been neglected. And that's one of the perspectives for future ecology, to understand the importance of those dynamics and disturbances for ecology.
Okay. I don't think we criticize the science we've done. I think the science we have done is what the bureaucrats have required us to do, and I think the bureaucrats have betrayed the spirit of the Water Framework Directive. And we could have been doing much more interesting science to create ecological measures of the state of ecology that are more than what we've got. What we've actually got is just developments of what was being done before. And I think it's the fault of the pressure of governments on the competent bodies, the competent agencies. And what they've done is to be resistant to change. And so, okay, what's been done is collection of a lot of data, but it's not actually introduced any new ideas, I don't think, into the scheme. And just to go back a bit further, there was a good experimental work being done in the 1930s and 40s. But that's been sort of lost sight of. And when I look at Hutchinson's 4 volumes on limnology, he came in just before the idea of fish and zooplankton and the influence of fish on zooplankton communities. But pretty well everything else he already knew. And we haven't really added anything more than detail to Hutchinson's understanding. Controversial, but when you give talks like this, you have to be controversial. It keeps people interesting. Yeah?
So it's always fun to think about, is the world going to hell or not? And my question is, on the one hand, we have a new generation that, sleeps the night before they're going to buy the next iPhone or whatever. And then there's also mass protests starting because of a park or a tree or endangered species. So you traveled the world, you've been longer here than I have. In your opinion, what's the new generation looking like? Are they more apathetic or less apathetic than your times?
I don't think they're less apathetic. I think the spirit of wanting the right things to be done is all there. I think they are to some extent, or it is to some extent, hemmed in by a system that is, in a sense, conspiring to do that. I think the whole way that science is now managed is essentially to decrease its importance while making it appear important. You put a lot of money in, but you isolate it. And that, I would say, is essentially a conspiracy on the part of strong and powerful interests to suppress that. And the same, I think, goes to the young. If your young thinkers feel they are constrained by the system, they are more afraid to speak out or to do things because they've got to eat. They've got to earn enough money, they've got to get their grant or their contract or their postdoctoral fellowship to do it. But I think the altruism, the enthusiasm, the spirit for change is still there. And I think it will eventually be released. I am an optimist. I think we will solve the problems. And although it may look a bit bleak at the moment, I think humans are incredibly resilient, and the lessons of history are that things can change overnight. And I think that's what will eventually prevail.
Well, thanks, Brian, for this very stimulating talk. I want to go back to a point that you said in your talk. I mean, perhaps we have gone too far with the theoretical framework of shallow lakes because we have been all very much biased by this beautiful idea of alternative stable states. And one of the best talks I saw in this conference was Thomas Anderson's talk. And he showed in another perspective, a paleolimnological perspective, I mean, are these states really stable? And I do believe they're not. If anyone here in this room plays with these models, you see that the parameter range where we can have alternative stable states and catastrophic shifts, they're quite narrow. And if we remember that 1/4 or 40% of the world, as Marianne has shown in her plenary lecture, they are in dry regions. So they are lakes that are fundamentally, they are determined by hydrological external forcing functions, as are the floodplain lakes. That is very common in South America. They are the most common type of lakes we have. And probably in Europe, you have already regulated most of your rivers. You don't have any floodplain lakes anymore, and you keep thinking on a very particular type of lake that definitely doesn't apply to all shallow lakes in the world. So I think we need to put an effort to work in more closer cooperation with hydrologists if we are to understand these dynamics of shallow lakes in connections to rivers that are not really what current theory in shallow lakes think of. Okay. Do you agree?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that I was at Tom's talk and I thought it was excellent. I pointed out that the concept of alternative states has actually been eroded, it's changed, the meaning has changed as people have picked it up and done things with it. And the original concept was a much more limited concept than how it's regarded now. But of course, it's just one stage in the development of a science, is you get an idea and then it's modified and changed and new things come. And that's a very healthy situation. And I think, looking at these floodplain lakes and the fact that you have large rises and falls in water, well, that's essentially the message I was giving from that African example. It's a very different concept from what we have in Europe. And our concept in Europe may be conditioned by just our limited lives and our experience over the last few decades. So I agree with you.
Thank you for the critical and inspiring... Oh, sorry. Thank you for the critical and inspiring talk. You mentioned that change will come from bottom up, or you believe that change will come from bottom up.
Yeah.
At the same time, you question or you challenge us, and not only us, but all the scientific community to do more theory or to do more new research. But but also you mentioned all these constraints. So how can we do the bottom up change? Given all these constraints in our research?
You do your research and you talk to your neighbors and you talk to your friends and you talk to your family. And you try to put over these ideas as best you can.
No, sorry. I mean, not in terms of changing the world, but like in terms of creating these new ideas and new theories in our own scientific field.
How do you get new ideas?
No, how do you get into do innovative research and getting new ideas from a bottom-up perspective, given the constraints from all these top-down actually constraints?
Okay, how do you break out of the system? Okay, you've got to do a certain amount to stay in the system, but you don't have to be a slave. I've gone through life being somewhat the bugbear of administrations because I haven't always agreed with what they said and have said so. But I've always found out that if you stand up to them, these people are bullies. If you stand up to them, then they will cave in. And I think, if the ideas, I think there is a general idea of displeasure with the way science has gone. And that came out at the discussion we had on Tuesday. There's quite a lot of passion came out there. And I think, the scientific system can be changed from inside so that there is more freedom, there is more ability to have new ideas and not to be constrained to it. The trouble is, we've got hooked on lots of money. And we like very flashy labs and new equipment and replacing it. When I started out, and when people like Hutchinson were operating, there was not nearly so much money. And essentially, I think the scientific community has been bribed by the amount of money now available in research. And in being bribed, you have to do, if he who pays the piper calls the tune, basically. And the funding bodies, they are paying you, the piper, and so you have to play his tune. But you don't actually have to do that. You can change the nature of the research you do. You can balance things. So I don't accept, that change is not possible, because I've seen it happen. I've seen people overcome the system.
The last one.
Oh, okay. Yes, hello, Brian. We started life together some 40 years ago. It seems to me that in the last 40 years or 50 years, we have seen a lot of rethinking on how shallow lakes work. But what I want to ask you is, do you think we've now lifted the lid, we've understood the engine, and actually we know how shallow lakes work? And so there will be no new insights into these shallow lakes. And that actually we should be beginning to move our attention to... the one thing I disagree with you is on the Water Framework Directive. I think it's a huge opportunity still, because there is now an enormous amount of attempts at management on a pretty big scale. They might not be big enough yet, but it provides scientists with the opportunity to do a lot of before-after controlled experiments, if you like, on a much bigger scale. And I think that might be the explanation of multi-authorship, is that it's allowing you to make comparisons on a much larger scale. And the question is, should we be looking less at the lake and more at the sort of longer term change and how it interacts elsewhere?
Yes, and I think we should be looking at the lake in a much bigger context, in a catchment and then in a global context. And I think that's where the next advances will come, not from within the lake itself. I think you are right, or I presume that's what you were suggesting, that we actually do understand shallow lakes pretty well. And we are crossing some dotting some I's and crossing some T's and finding slight variations on the general principles. But I think we understand the general principles pretty well. So I think that's why I think we need to some new ideas to look outside and to look onto a bigger scale. I quite like the analogy of the freshwater system as the bloodstream of the land, because bloodstreams essentially take away wastes and put back nutrients. There is a two-way interaction with the land. And for too long, I think we've separated the freshwaters from the land, and we need to put them back together again. And there may be problems with the prejudices of terrestrial ecologists, but we have to overcome those.
Thank you very much, Brian.